Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone. So thank you so much for joining me, Sadhvi. I'm really pleased to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's really lovely to be here.
So can we start off by giving a little bit of a background about sort of how you found yourself doing quite a lot of work and activism on the concept of decolonization or decolonizing?
How did I get here? That's a tough one, because without giving you some sort of life history, it's really difficult to get there. But, you know, for one thing, I think having lived experience of being a racialized minority in the UK, in London, growing up around family stories and histories around partition in India, engaging with the struggle of Kashmir and Azadi, coming from a Kashmiri Pandit lineage, for me, I think grounded me in a I guess a politics, I would have to say. It's a politics of questioning the dominant narrative, because the dominant narrative seems to do a lot of harm to a lot of people. I guess I've always been drawn to understanding marginalized experiences, potentially because I self-identify with those experiences that I grew up going through on a very regular basis, even in a place like Harrow, which is a huge immigrant community living here, mostly South Asian. I still remember, you know, as a teenager, as a child, walking around the streets and feeling really unsafe, being called names, being chased down, I remember having stones thrown at me. So these kinds of daily sort of experiences of violence, I think solidified within me that, yes, I am other, but I want to reclaim that. And I want to speak back and then also speak with the other marginalized communities. And so I think that was really how I got into, I think how I even conceived that I could be someone who is involved in decolonizing politics. But obviously I'm a university lecturer, and so that means that I've had a fair bit of experience of doing degrees and learning, and for sure, I was always made to feel that during my undergraduate degree, I couldn't see myself in that degree. It was a degree in psychology. I was surrounded by brown and black people because we were like a majority minority university. But the curriculum was so white and so Europeanized. And I would always feel like, where's my story in this? You know, the explanations of European dominance in the curriculum just never felt right. I mean, how do you counter, what you're being taught on the curriculum with what you're learning about your history and your subjectivity through your family, right? Through those family histories that you've grown up around. So that was always a kind of clash during my undergraduate studies. And I guess it was after those undergraduate studies, I decided, you know what, I'm actually going to have to get out of the UK, because I can't, I need to sort of, I guess back then it was this romantic idea to reconnect with my heritage. And I
Mm.
went to Delhi for a year, and I worked there with two NGOs. Um, and that was a real formative experience, because in some way, whilst I was again an outsider in India, having a British accent,
Mm.
um, having the kind of body politics, the way I hold myself,
Yeah.
the way I kind of make conversation with people, those are all Europeanized, if you like, right? But
Mm.
it was nevertheless, I think, a really grounding experience, where going forward, because the next step after that year out was doing my PhD, going forward, I was like, this is what I want to center. These
Mm.
are the kind of politics I want to deal with. I want to talk about colonialism, post-colonialism. I want to think about how European logics still shape the direction and the capacity of Indian people, trying to do this work through NGOs, through development agencies, how there's still this horrible discord between any kind of sovereign, indigenous, non-Western, non-Europeanized way of organizing for social progress.
I mean, you tell a fascinating story, and one I reckon that sort of resonates with a lot of people growing up in the UK, sort of having these contrarian identities within yourself and not really. I mean, I guess at a younger age, you don't have the voice to navigate it or sort of
Mm,
be able to fight back. But then you get to a certain point where you're in a position and in a position to say something, and you've sort of developed the confidence, you've developed the knowledge and the experience. So how
mm,
does that sort of translate to what you're doing now in terms of
mm,
like you're talking about sort of like one of the things that you mentioned earlier, which really like impacted me in a way, was the fact that you said you needed to um, be elders, seen as elders. So
mm.
talk me through this idea of having sort of this almost like a hierarchical structure, but one of solidarity.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I think becoming good elders and the idea of being an elder is something that is um, certainly something that speaks to the need for that intergenerational support. So
Mm.
by that I mean, um, as you come into academia, let's say, you look out, even if you don't know it, you're looking out for someone in that university who's going to represent and know you, who's going to not want a whole kind of backlog of explanations of how you got to where you got to. When you bring your experiences to the seminar, or as a question posed, there's not this kind of distance in terms of just getting each other.
Mm.
And when I was on my degree, and even at high school, I was always looking for these women who looked like me.
Mm.
And I didn't know I was doing that. So for a long time, I was like, oh, why did I like Miss Virginia so much? Why did I like Parveen Adams so much? Oh, they were so formative in my own sort of learning and what. And it was only years afterwards, I was like, oh, they look like me.
Mm.
They got me. Um, and so this idea of elders is not just about, I should say, replicating one body with
Mm.
another body,
Yeah.
but it's about understanding that there is a power that is a generative power.
Mm.
It's a power that enables you to grow. It's a power that grounds you when you're feeling fragmented and torn apart.
Yeah.
And that does come from someone potentially with more experience in the game, with more, with reflections, and that would actually help to recenter you, if you like, when you're going through a period or an experience that is extremely unsettling. And that's really where the kind of idea of good elders comes from. But I guess it also has something to do with how brown and black families do center elders to a large degree, and how at least from and this is from a very personal lived experience of being, you know, in part of a South Asian community where elders are always given a place, you know. And that's not to romanticize elders, because there's a lot of elders out there who can also do a lot of damage, right? So this is not like a romanticization of older people, but just recognizing that you can have your peers, you can have your siblings, you can have the colleagues that you're working around, but when you have someone out there who is a little bit more older, who's a bit more experienced, and they're seeing their time pass through you, what you're doing, and they're able to reframe it in a way where you're not, you know, blaming yourself for something, that they're giving you that kind of that look through history and saying, this is a pattern, you know, this is going to repeat itself, and here's what you need to do. That kind of knowledge and that kind of power that's generative, I think that's what I think, you know, we were trying to get at when we talked about a good elder.
Well, I think it's a very powerful point, and I think it's a point, in my opinion, I think it's a point that is so overlooked and kind of, you know, disregarded in many ways when you're sort of talking about challenging these concepts of a colonial way of doing things. And one of the things that sort of comes to mind when we're discussing this is the fact that, you know, now, for example, in my opinion, and I'm sure you've encountered this many times, but you're probably seen as a nuisance. And the reason why you're being seen as a nuisance is because it's almost like the status quo feel like that people make it, you know, people discussing decolonization in its true form are just making noise. But in fact, we're like, you're actually doing more than that. You're trying to create these structures where there's elders, where there's solidarity, where there's a continual passing of information and you know, lived experience. So having experienced that, how do we sort of move forward in terms of furthering this push for decolonization?
Yeah, and also, what are we moving forward towards and into? You know, we have a climate crisis. We have the alliancing of far right, now very legitimate politicians. You know, we have an explicit anti-Islamic, Islamophobic agenda that has coalesced through the war on terror and now in policies such as Prevent, and continues to be normalized. So that's the first thing. Let's just think about the future we're getting into, that we're moving towards. So in terms of what do we do, you know, I sincerely believe that we need to find ways of collectivizing for our own survival and our own health and our own growth. I think you're absolutely right that, you know, you are often labeled a troublemaker or a nuisance when you repeatedly are trying to do as much justice to your position and your politics when you enter a collective space, or a space that has many different positions and points of view in it. Because you're a nuisance, because, you know, you're not supposed to do this. You're supposed to be the good immigrant. You're supposed to be grateful for what you've got. And that's why it's so unsettling. You know, why don't you just, you know, come on board and join the train, because we're going that way. The train's going in a horrendously dangerous, volatile, and violent place, and I don't want to get on that train. And so the few of us, or the many of us, who can find some kind of synergy, and you know, it doesn't have to be that we all have exactly the same experience of oppression, but that we actually understand that there is a similar and patterned experience of oppression, and on those grounds move towards protecting each other. And you know, that protection is really powerful. It can be the smallest act, but it can actually ensure that someone survives, and that, I think, is important.
Absolutely. I think in the context of education, though, don't you think that sort of um, as minority sort of communities in the UK, we do still give them the legitimacy of being oppressive, when it comes to sort of the curriculum, and when it comes to these sort of elite establishments, whether they're universities or whether they're colleges. Don't you think that we still contribute to that by saying, you know, by by enabling sort of young people to have this, feel like they'll earn a status if they went there? When if we sort of challenge that notion from early on and actually removed it, and remove this element of prestige that goes with those names, that we'd be doing something useful for us.
Prestige which goes with which names?
I mean, if, for example, Oxbridge. So growing up, you know, going to like Oxbridge, for example, was like, you know, the ultimate level of success in education. When that's not particularly true now that I've been in higher education for however many years.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I mean, higher education is definitely structured with, you know, Oxbridge at the top, Russell groups next, and then all your post 92s afterwards fall in line, don't they? And there are, I would say that, whereas that sort of racing towards an institution like Oxbridge, which is known for being explicitly racist and a violent space for a lot of people of color, racing towards that as some sort of, you know, I don't know, some sort of ultimate goal, if you like, of being a student or an academic is definitely problematic. Very often, I have to say, in meetings at universities where, you know, they'll be like, well, you know, Oxbridge is doing this, and, you know, Oxbridge is you know, and I do always say, like, we don't want to be like Oxbridge. That's the, you know, that's not what we should be aiming for. I also just want to say that the university, be it post 92 or be it Oxbridge, has not been made for in an inclusive way. The whole parameter and the whole agenda around knowledge production and how that knowledge is taught in universities across the board, I would say, has come from, you know, a sort of English speaking community, okay, because English is a lingua franca, it's a universal language of academia, and we've got to be very upfront about that. But it's also come from certain ideas and logics that are European or North American, and those things structure, if you like, global academia. So you will find universities in Pakistan, in India, in South Africa, emulating this European model for higher education. So I would say that as a decolonizer, the demand to decolonize the university is actually the demand to imagine a new form of learning, a new community of learning, which might not necessarily be the university. But, you know, I say this as being a university lecturer, as someone who is complicit in that way, because as I work, teach, write, publish as an academic, I'm also upholding that very institution that I have a problem with. And so I guess we need to be, I think we should always sort of actually listen to the most radical voices in these debates, because those are the ones that push us closer to any kind of justice. And at the same time, I need to be realistic and say, you know, I also have a place in that system, right, as an academic. And so there is this kind of doubleness, if you like, around being part in the system and then trying to work against it as well.
And I think that that's, again, that's sort of a predicament that many people sort of find themselves in. It's not so much a predicament as it is a challenge, but, you know, it's a challenge of like you being the voice that works to change from within. So the voices that are outside can also contribute, and it's a collective effort. And I think one of the things that I really liked about sort of the work that you're doing is you're challenging these ideas inside the business school, because the business school, you rightfully point out, is fundamentally a white establishment. Like, it's a white institution. It's built in that way. I mean, look, if you look at the case studies, if you look at, you know, the what's taught, sort of the theories, etc., they're, you know, fundamentally white. One of the things that I discovered very recently was, you know, there's a debate, a very legitimate debate that's being had about whether what's his name, the main sort of the classical economist, Adam Smith, whether he stole his idea from Ibn Khaldun, you know, from. So there's all these things are starting to emerge, but when we look at sort of the business school, it's a white, like, it's built for a white male. And it graduates people to go into those white male institutions to be financiers, etc. So being in the business school and sort of seeing it sort of up, like, firsthand, and being part of it, how do you suggest, or how do you propose we, one, look at business schools, and two, change the way in which things are practiced?
I mean, well, the business school is, it's first and foremost the educational arm of capitalism, right? So if we look at capitalism and we notice and we accept the critiques of capitalism as being inherently patriarchal, Eurocentric, and accumulating wealth for white elites, then it is absolutely necessary to look at the educative arm of capitalism, which is the business school, and to question whether, to what extent it can be transformed, and to what extent is the education redundant then? Because if you are producing knowledge that is responsible for a climate crisis, if you're producing knowledge that is responsible for the ongoing deprivation of non-white regions of the world, of which there are many, then you have to question the premise for the way we think about management, the way we think about business. Are we looking for an alternative management, or are we looking for something altogether different? Another way of living, surviving, being well in the world. So I think that question is a very deep question, actually, that because once you start peeling one layer back, then there are multiple other
Mm.
dimensions of the business school that also suggest that it's a it's a it's a it's a flawed entity, in as much that it is teaching a very specific and a very tiny um, um, fraction of the knowledge that's out there in the universe, the ways of being, the ways of being well and living well in the world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I think you're spot on, and there are lots of challenges there. Um, Moving forward for yourself, what do you envisage your research will begin to focus on?
Um, yeah, I'm actually enjoying this moment and so I'm really enjoying furthering my collaborations with other writers, working with the Decolonising Alliance, which is an alliance of people of color in the global north and scholars in the global south, trying to create a dialogue and sitting with the tensions and contradictions of doing this work, and what kind of potential solidarity can we create when our lived experiences are so different and the context in which we are working in are so different. So I sort of look forward to continuing that work, and I think one of the biggest, I guess, the biggest challenges, but also I think one of the most generative aspects of my work has been to actually fully explore what collective work and what collaborative work means when you're doing this work with
Mm-hmm.
scholars in very different contexts from your own.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah.
mean, I wish you all the best with it. I think the work that you're doing is extremely important for bringing a really authentic voice to the decolonizing conversation, because like you said earlier, it has become somewhat of a buzzword, and it
Mm,
attracts the funding, it attracts the sort of the CV sort of polishing. um
mm.
what advice would you give to young um women of color who want to get into the world of academia as academics and researchers?
Okay, my advice would be to make sure you have a community of women of color around you, be that fellow students or more critical voices within academia who you can feel that you can approach. Um, I would also say that don't be confined to your reading list or your training program. Um, Feel that you can explore and go beyond that and bring your own lived experience to your work.
Mm,
That is knowledge, and that is a very important uh, part of um, what academia and intellectual work should include. So those are the things that I would definitely um, um, suggest. And also, I would say that if you don't have a space or you don't have a community, make it.
mm,
You know, you don't need to ask permission to start
mhm,
a group or a reading group. You don't need to ask permission to collectivize or campaign around certain issues. You can do it.
mhm,
Um, and I think it's really internalizing um, that message to yourself and to others around you, which will help to, I think, um, heal some of the hurt and the difficulties that you'll experience.
mhm,
Um, and also, yeah, I mean, mental health,
mhm,
self-care, those are important parts of I would say central parts of being in this world as a woman of color. and it's very easy to not look after yourself. It's very easy to not take that break that you needed, to not, you know, share your experiences with others and keep them to yourself and internalize those. So I think building spaces and building those communities is really important.
Absolutely. I think that's fantastic advice. Where can people find you online?
So they can find me online. I've got a blog called Left of Brown, and I've also I'm on Twitter at Dr. Sadhvi Dar, I think. And yeah, obviously I've got my staff web pages as well.
Yeah, I'll link all of them onto the episode anyway, so people can get direct access if they wanted to reach out or follow you or follow your work. Thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really hope to have you on sometime soon.
Yeah, I'd love that, Hussein. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video, and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone.